So the first talk this afternoon is by Jacqui Mulville of Cardiff University, who I know has done a lot of archaeology in Scotland, has a particular interest in islands and their communities in terms of their bioarchaeology. And indeed, a lot of our research focuses on the field of bioarchaeology, and it's been very conveniently defined for me as the study of once living materials. And she has a particular interest in osteoarchaeology and the articulation between the different types of evidence recovered from archaeological sites and the interpretive frameworks used in the construction of human and animal identities. So Jacqui is going to speak to us on storytelling. So thank you very much.
As you heard, my name is Jacqui Mulville and I tell stories to people, So today I'm going to tell you sort of part of my story as a communicator in archaeology and actually reflect on storytelling in archaeology in general. One of my favourite devices for talking to people about the past is known as the interactive washing line of time, with events, actions and ideas pegged onto a chronological framework, i.e. a piece of string. But anyway, I'm going to start by pegging some of my story on this line for you. So I began my career in biology, as everybody seems to, a lot of people seem to this weekend. And I got sidetracked into archaeology when I realised what really interested me was the relationship between humans and the natural world. I've worked in archaeology for 30-something years, started as a child genius, of course, and working as an excavation volunteer, then employee for the then newly formed, now recently deceased English Heritage. After my PhD, I've worked both independently and for commercial units. Later, I became a regional science advisor for English Heritage, looking after the East Midlands. And for the past decade or so, I've been at Cardiff University. As both a field archaeologist and a bone specialist, I've worked across time periods, from the Mesolithic to the Middle Ages and beyond. And I actually think that, on reflection, this exposure to such a wide range of archaeologies has given me space to kind of cross traditional spatial and chronological divides, to see new connections and, in fact, help me to tell wider stories. So in my career, the stories I tell and the audiences I speak to have varied immensely. I've told tales of varying types to specialists and site directors, from school kids to local societies, from scientists to students and shoppers to shaman. In doing this, I found out the best tales are those that are tailored towards your audiences. And this is a picture of Tom Dawson actually telling stories about Balashare, on the recent Hebridean Archaeological Forum. So stories are powerful narratives. They can lead us through a variety of information to a new realization. I always tell my students that their research must tell a story. Without an argument, a narrative or a debate, the excitement of discovery just gets lost, and with it, your readership. So today I'm going to draw on my experiences and discuss archaeological stories, both traditional and novel. So some of the things I'm going to sort of think about is who creates archaeological stories, how are they told, who are they for, why do they matter, and are there new ways of telling authentic archaeological stories? So my first point, who creates stories of the past? We do, obviously. Archaeology explodes. The archaeological past exists, sort of lying buried in the ground or in the archive, in plain sight or in pieces, until archaeologists breathe life into it. From single finds to entire landscapes, and excavated archaeological features or assemblages lie dormant. Until, like a literal time bomb, I feel they explode through the act of excavation and exploration. And this kind of single entity spreads out to include a whole raft of researchers and creates new thoughts, ideas, and actions. The moment of discovery might be an individual act, but once the archaeology machine becomes involved, the past is curated and created by a whole range of organisations, from national heritage bodies to commercial units, museums, academic, independent researchers. And how do we talk to each other? Well, we use this kind of specialist language. I should point out that all the images I show are actually things I've been involved in. So Cladhallen was a site I dug in the Western Isles. I've published in both of these. I wrote the Iron Age report in Yarnton. So I've tried to keep it personal. So it's not that I don't have the Scottish examples. If they're British ones, it's because I'm sort of using myself as the model. And if I'm criticising anybody, I'm criticising myself as much as anyone else. So once archaeologists begin to kind of record and query things, we introduce specialist language. Of course we do. Codes and data. Dissecting the past for our better understanding and reporting on it to preserve this finite resource by record. archaeological excavations often result in specialist volumes for specialist audiences. And the common output is the excavation monograph. You can find one outside. You know, they are great. But they're sort of, sometimes they're a funny mixture of kind of the general and the specific. Sort of stamp collecting album. Oh, I've got one of them. You know, data source and a story. So journal papers, I put up Journal Archaeological Science because my students loathe it. Oh, do we have to? You know, from the highly specific, unreadable by many maybe, to the more synthetic. And elsewhere you get regional chronological reviews and HER records. So I've taken parts in both the publications, as I say. And these are archaeological stories, but often they only speak to particular people in specific parts, to specific audiences. There are conventions, as I'd have to teach my students, in language, style, illustration. And much of the analysis is very focused at a particular audience, sometimes with a priori knowledge. You have to know what you're looking at or reading in order to understand it. Of course, and I mean, you know, as Mary said yesterday, this is kind of true for all disciplines. Everybody has a language that they speak to, you know, other people within that group. However, what's interesting now is we are coming to an era where there's an emphasis on open access of papers. So I don't know if you're aware of this, is now under the Research Excellence Framework, which is sort of the football league for archaeologists, your publications will only be judged if they are open access, that they're freely available to the public. And with this is actually reframing the way that archaeological journals both publish, promote, and actually interpret their contents to try and attract you, the wider audience, to read about what's going on. So from this rich source of material that we have, you know, straight from the horse's mouth, or the specialist's mouth, we encounter various types of new interpretive stories. You can think of museum exhibitions and monuments with their labels, panels, and screens, or publications produced for a wider audience, from books to magazines. And these are the best sellers on Amazon at the moment. I was amused to notice the Richard III one was there. I have to say, Amazon has a very strange definition of archaeology as well. I filtered those out. These tend to use less specialist terms and are pitched at a more general audience. And then we have the news. From papers, television, radio, to blogs, tweets, and posts. Within the media, the hook is the thing. That's what they want. They want a good hook, as I discovered, possibly to my dismay. Upon finding a small bandy-legged dog, a Welsh cur, which in Welsh is actually corgi, you know, cur dog, we posted a light-hearted note on our university website. The result is in a media sensation. Yes, I was on page 36 of The Sun. And eventually ended up with a letter from the House of Commons, the leader of the House of Commons, asking me about my valuable research into corgis. Elsewhere, royal resurrections and reinterments have familiarised many of us with car park archaeology, paleopathology, isotopes, and DNA. But interpretation of archaeological science do also feature in current and in fact past political discourse. As we've heard from Audrey on Friday, they become part of sort of identities and the way people construct their identities. Ooh. And for example, this is a great example, the recent work on modern haplotypes linked to those whose great-grandparents can be traced to living in particular localities. So this is the kind of complex image that we all sort of spread out through the media. And it led to, that is just fantastic, led to media headlines that dealt with local long-term divisions, the Cornish and the people from Devon, between North and South Wales, to German invasions. I think the Guardian should be ashamed of themselves for this one. That's the 1966 World Cup. I mean, come on. Archaeology for some. Vikings that pillaged but did not rape. So stories of the past are always instrumentalised. You know, I don't actually think you can move away from it, but people do worry. So this leads me on to Time Team. With the loss of Time Team, we're now treated to a new genre of TV stories. This is a Time Team show I was in, often based on science or exploration, as well as offerings by organisations such as National Geographic. I did Nazi cows recently as well. Within many of these programmes, archaeologists are mediated through a presenter, rarely allowed to speak directly to the camera, but with our words smoothed and soothed by a familiar, trusted face. Often I always think they steal your ideas, then pretend they're theirs. But anyway, there are a number of exceptions to this, obviously. You know, and there's a sort of a new set of archaeology media faces, the Brian Coxes of archaeology, that actually do provide a slightly more direct interface. However, all of these stories are generally one way. They're broadcast to a public whose engagement is often reduced to comments at the bottom of Facebook pages. Though, as you know, there are obviously exceptions. I mean, there's a range of stories that have different points of view, and in this, perhaps these are less directly linked to data, that they embrace both fantasy and fiction. So there are films from Indiana Jones to Lara Croft to National Treasure, novels, Stigger the Dump, Clan of the Cave Bear, which strangely I've never read, to Wolf Brother, and the graphic novels of things such as Mesolith. So Mesolith is the one closest to me. The latter two are both enjoyable, highly researched, fictionalized accounts of the Mesolithic. Another response to archaeology that other institutions have been playing with recently are comics. So CADU has funded a series of comics on 3 of their most popular monuments on Anglesey. And again, they're kind of interpretive stories based on data, but told for new audiences in new ways. I recently went to see an opera about the archaeologist's wife. There's sculpture, visual arts. And for example, there was a recent event on Orkney called Wilder Being, which was about art, archaeology, and actually part of being human. So why is it important to tell creative stories? I wonder if we can draw parallels with science fiction. Space travel, like time travel, is costly, and to a great extent, science fiction has actually helped to pave the way for public support of the space race. Do archaeological fictions have the same power? We tend to think about which of the many stories told about archaeology that archaeologists control. We need to think about which of the stories archaeologists control or mediate, and which ones we should control. How can we, and should we, better communicate with the public? So many of the large UK units are actually educational charities, and they have been doing this for years. They do have a remit to talk to the public. I think people like York Archaeological Trust and Wessex and Oxford Archaeology, to name a few. But whilst we've always communicated aspects of our work, what, if anything, has changed? What are the new ways that we're telling people about the past, and why? There's an increasing demand for us to speak more directly to wider audiences with different voices, to people of different ages, interests, accessibilities. This is part of a series of broader political and social changes, I think, that have been changing place. I mean, I see the beginnings actually reaching back to, there was a sea change around the time the Heritage Lottery Fund was established in '94. And I think it was a significant milestone, because at its core, this new funding relationship had communities, ownership, and sustainability. And building on these new models of funding, came the ideas of a deeper engagement with the public. And by late 2007, this actually percolated into academia. The RC UK, which is the people who actually give money to universities for research, and the Higher Education Funding Council set up these things called the beacons. They were beacons for engagement. There were 6 of them across Wales, and this is actually sort of where my story comes back into it. The idea was that they would encourage universities to work both with the public and with institutions. So what is engagement? I can give you days, workshops, months on this. So engagement is, the ways that we talk to the public, and it should be a two-way process. So I've actually moved, as a result of the funding that was available and the project I became into, I moved to a different form of engagement. Essentially, I met an artist with an interest in animals, and he persuaded me to actually apply for and get involved in this. Luckily, he also had experience in working with very diverse groups, and we came together with a science exploration centre called TechniQuest and the National Museum Wales to design this new interaction, and we called it Future Animals. And in it, we challenged teenagers to explore their place in the future. We used art and archaeology, mythical beasts and bioengineered animals to create a two-way debate on our past, our present, and our future manipulation of other species. We combined science with local and global issues. The project was very successful, and if you really want to know more, there is a rather fantastic talk and the TEDx you can find on YouTube. But the major output for me was actually a reframing of my own work and my own attitudes. Working across disciplines, because I worked with obviously artists, museums, science explorations, and a conservation biologist, Professor Mike Bruford, challenged my perceptions on a number of levels and ultimately reinforced the relevance of my own work to present and to future societies. Some of the points raised by our project were really highly complex and contentious. Food security, bioethics, human exploitation of other species. We didn't provide answers, but we did provide the context for a wider, better informed debate. So once we'd done this, I began to think, maybe we could go out. Well, now we've dealt with tricky teenagers, perhaps we can go and meet other audiences in other arenas and, you know, have another debate with these people about some of the issues that occur through a consideration of our past. So I created Guerrilla Archaeology. I decided to focus in this on people who traditionally disengaged with heritage outside of traditional learning environments. Those who do not go to museums, watch Time Team or visit excavations. So the artist and I took future animals to a music festival. Why a music festival? 7.7 million people go to music festivals. That's a large number of people. And there's been by people there, they're actually quite often very interested in getting engaged in other ways of thinking and other activities besides just watching music. So we went to a science area and we encouraged people to get down and dirty with the past. So it's quite interesting when you set something up to think, well, you know, what is your aim? So we came up with a sort of a manifesto. So our chief motivation was not instruction, but provocation. We wanted to use archaeological research to act as a facilitator for debate. Not to give anybody a particular truth, but to give them, enable them to find their own truth, so they can construct their own relationships with the past. This means providing access to accurate information, but allowing and promoting debates on meaning, relevance, and interpretations. In doing this, we co-create a past, rooted in research, but in collaboration with the wider public. And actually, I spend a lot of my time saying, we don't know. I think it's important to explain that archaeological evidence can only take stories about the past so far. Archaeological interpretations are, to a greater or lesser extent, built on a number of facts, but fleshed out by a number of fictions, a range of fictions. I feel that the past is simultaneously as familiar as your family, but as foreign as a strange land. And as archaeologists, we have to work with ambiguities all the time, and with different stories that branch out from our evidence. And these complexities, I think, we do need to explain to the public, and quite often they can best be explored through a two-way conversation. So since this first event over 5 years ago, we've developed a series of workshops informed and driven by public interest on our own expertise. We've worked at venues and events from festivals of death to shopping centres. I've discovered don't ask people if they want to know about shamanism in shopping centres, because they think you're religious. You're trying to get them to change their religion rather than talk to you about archaeology. Perform with shamans and drummers, scientists, actors and artists. Every year we tell news stories. We provide first-hand access to archaeologists, to the general public. We host stories and conversations about the past. We're particularly interested in speaking about complex or contentious issues. And our themes are driven by what the audiences we go out and talk to are interested in, and that I or my team have an active research interest in. So as a result, we've tackled shamans in Shamanic Street Preachers. I was very proud of that one. Coming from Wales, there's a band called the Manic Street Preachers, you may or may not know, and I had a moment of revelation. May I just point out my daughter and my niece, because her family are in the audience here. And this is the headdresses that you've seen. We recreated using traditional flint tools, copies of the Star Car headdresses, and took them out and asked people what they were for. And we told them what the archaeological evidence was, and we asked them to engage with us. So by the end of it, I felt like I was selling them, you know. Okay, can I sell you these, sir? They're both for your masculinity, good for hunting, and also talking to the gods. But anyway. We've also tackled archaeoastronomy. People are very, very interested in, our relationship with the sun, the moon, the stars, about monument alignments and things. And so I got very giddy because I just really love these gold hats that are in Berlin. And I made copies out of paper mache and got people to wear them. And through that, we had a very long series of debates about, I have no idea what that noise is, about meanings, the sky, the sun. I've also talked to people about monument making. We went out and made a tiny Stonehenge out of cloth. So we got people to make Stonehenge, and it's actually really difficult to make a monument, even when it's that big, I've discovered. So we give people compasses, a load of very small stones, and ask them to lay out Stonehenge, and you can have a conversation about how did they do it and why did they do it. And then we talk about, because my postdoc, Richard Madrick's work is on a feeding Stonehenge project. Tie it into that. And also we do lots of other strange things. I've created top trumps for hunters versus farmers. These are not the final ones, but they were funded by NERC, and they'll be available to you soon. So what's the importance of these engagements? We all know the past is important, and thanks to Ian, we now know that there's the virtuous circle, where if you get people interested, if they enjoy, they understand their heritage, then they'll value it and they'll care for it. And I've just pressed something. Has it gone? Thank you. But during the period I've actually been communicating with the public, new imperatives have actually been born. For academia, for example, there's this thing called impact. Again, it features in our kind of league tables, and it's become very, very important and very, very much to the forefront of universities' mind, because essentially it translates into funding and places on league tables. And the idea is to focus academics' minds on transmitting knowledge to other audiences, to see how worthwhile our work is, what difference it's made to people's lives, to the planet, to policy, or to people's pleasure. In turn, this information is fed back to the government about what we've done, and eventually to the public, which allows us to prove the worth of the money invested in our research. I think we can actually learn from other arenas from engaging with the public. The Museum Association released, I think it was last year, or the year before, a manifesto called Museums Change Lives. And in this they argue that new modes of working with the public via co-creation is an effective form of social action. And in doing this, they also echo things that have been highlighted in the Faro Convention, which is everybody has a right to engage with the cultural heritage of their choice. There have been a range of fantastic initiatives going across Britain. There's been a number of digital initiatives with museums and archaeology via the AHRC and the REACT projects. Elsewhere, pioneering new stories and engagements are changing the lives of those with combat stress or the homeless. Within Scotland, there were a range of fantastic examples, which I'm hoping we might hear a bit more about later. Things like the project Scotland's Royal Past, Hidden Heritage, who created a Bayeux tapestry / embroidery. Northlight Heritage, who I think may be represented here today, who had an Elvish-themed play about their archaeological sites. We can think about Adopt a Monument, who've been creating 3D monuments and printing them for community heritage sites, and other places that have used waterways to weave together communities and tell the story of the past of one particular area. So, what's going to happen in the future? I'd like to point out that lots of these projects are not without criticism. People have said, is this archaeology or is this social work? Where is the pure research? Are we becoming debased as vehicles, that prop up a failing society? How sustainable are the models of engagement? For example, the scrabble to continue, the HLF funding, or other finite project resources. And how long will our stories last? So involvement with archaeology and with heritage in general is recognised as a good thing. But it's hard to capture this data. As Ian discussed yesterday, evaluation of the value of heritage outside of tourism is actually quite difficult. And I think one of the things that we should be trying to do is to get better at capturing and collating data on how our engagement changes lives. Museums have been in the business of doing this for much longer than archaeologists and much better. And they're all too familiar with how hard it is to do this and the issues that are involved. And whilst the eureka moment, archaeology changed my life, it makes a great headline. Changes in lifestyles, in attitudes, and in governments are actually made up of a series of small cumulative events. Going forward, I actually feel that we need to we need our archaeological stories to continue to multiply, to weave new pathways, binding people more closely to their past. If we believe that the past is relevant, it must inform the present and it must shape our futures. And thank you to everybody who's been involved in any of the projects I've worked on. Cheers.
Thank you very much indeed, Jacqui. That was fascinating. So I think there's time for one or two questions from people in the audience.
Jacqui, you spoke during the early part of your talk about the complication of working through the media. And it seems to me that an awful lot of the engagement we have with the general public is all going in the right direction. I have a feeling that the engagement that we have with the media, because they think they know your story, and will transmit it in a way that they think suits the idea of how that story should be transmitted, is probably one of our greatest dangers. And I wonder whether you've got any comment on how do you educate?
How do you educate the press?
The press.
Yes, well, I think there's a lot of politicians who are wondering that at the moment. It's very interesting because, I mean, one of the things that I encourage people to do is to actually go on media training courses, go on courses to be taught about how to deal with the media. Because it's not just about being able to go on television, but it's actually about being able to manipulate that relationship and try and drive it forward. And also, it's quite often about resisting the temptation that the media have. That once they get you, they'll try and get you to say things that you don't necessarily mean and things. And it is, I think, a lot of it's about training and it's about standing your ground on an individual basis and on a group basis, I guess, by having better informed journalists and actually trying to work more closely with them. Because I do think that there are a series of issues that we don't engage because we don't think they're very good and they don't think we're very good because we don't engage. So I think you have to try and work more closely. I mean, I did make the conscious decision that I would actually start to try, instead of going, oh no, not me, I don't want to talk to you, to actually try to talk to the media.
Will they give you time?
Yeah, I mean, they do. I mean, I think if you're a really good scientist and you think the media don't do a good job, and you refuse to speak to them, they'll phone someone else. And they will keep phoning until they find somebody who will say something. So part of it is you think, oh, I don't know enough about that. And the other part of it is then, but if you don't know enough about it, you know more about it as a professional than most of the other people in the country. So I think we all have a kind of a duty to actually communicate. Because if you don't communicate, they will keep phoning until they find someone. So for example, in the National Geographic programme I was in, the guy who was a great director was asking me questions and trying to get me to answer them. And in the end, I said, I can't answer these questions because that's not my area of expertise. But then when I watched the programme, I was absolutely delighted or horrified to find, of course, he'd found somebody else who would answer them. So I think it is hard. Television is not academia. Academia is not TV, for example. Yes.
Thanks very much for that talk, Jacqui. I was just wondering, is there any part of society that you think can't be reached by telling archaeological stories?
No. I don't know. There probably is. I mean, I think actually if you look at the diversity of students in British institutions is actually quite an interesting one, because people who do British archaeology are generally of a particular sort of social group and class. I mean, I think we have issues in trying to relate to diverse communities. I don't think we can't. I think we just have to find better ways of making it relevant. And I can't think of anybody. You could challenge me.
That was, apart from being a fabulous talk, I've just come back from Cardiff as well, which is a fabulous city. There was much thought provoked at the CIFOR conference there about some of what you've been talking about. But I'm interested in, there's no such thing as a sort of monolithic general public.
No.
So do you decide who to engage, or do you place yourself in a place where you can be then engaged? Yes.
Both, I think, is actually the answer. I mean, we're very good at our particular audiences now, because we've gone out and we've spoken to them. So it means important things about co-creation and co-participation. So, for example, we have the Guerrilla project, which is we're excavating a hill fort in the east end of town in Cardiff, in a place that actually traditionally is not particularly highly regarded in the community. And actually, we're working with those people, and I've lost track of what I'm talking about now. Sorry, could you ask me the question again?
Right, I've just come back from Cardiff.
No, go back to the beginning.
Basically, what's about because there's no such thing as a monolithic general public. It is a case of you
Yes,
either
yes,
engage
sorry.
or...
I remember now. I remember where I was going with my point. Where I was going with my point was that the project's really successful because we work with the community groups. And so they're right at the very, very heart of it, and they're partners right from the very beginning. So the whole, for years we've been very good at going and telling people things that we think they want to hear. And what you actually need to do is to find people who have kind of local knowledge and try and embed yourself. So I would say to people, if you want to go and talk to a community, choose one you know something about to start with, or find somebody who knows something about them and do it in partnership. Because otherwise you're just going with your, with your own preconceptions and saying, we think you'd really like to know about knitting or something. Whereas in fact they don't. They want to know about, something completely different, pubs or something. So it's the best ones are where you actually build relationships with other organisations, I think.
Okay, folks, so I think we'll move on. So thank you very much indeed for that, Jacqui. That was fascinating, gave us lots of great ideas for engagement. So I just thank Jacqui again very much for her contribution.